It doesn't happen very often. But I'm generally speaking a weirdly careful eater because we've lived in flats where we've not had a proper dinner table for most of our lives. So eating carefully is to reduce crumbs, to reduce spills, is a thing that's baked into my brain now.
If you had a table, then would you eat at the table?
Yeah.
We have a table and we never eat at the table.
Oh, you do, don't you? Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah. To be fair, we in our current place, where you remember from when we did the live statics, there is a table in the corner that Connor used, which we could drag out, but the problem is it's not out all the time because it's a flat. So bringing it out is like a task.
I'm looking forward to the day when you have a table.
I'm not
100% sure. I'm not 100% sure you'd eat at it, but we'll see.
I don't disagree. You might be onto something, but I don't have the answer.
Except on a Sunday roast at my parents', then we'll eat at the table.
Do they make you?
No, it's just something we do. Although to be fair, last I was around for Father's Day and we didn't eat at the table. And I found a roast. I got it all down me, and we watched a Channel 5 documentary on the rise and fall of Noel Edmonds.
Jesus Christ.
roll the credits.
Hello and welcome to Analysing Avatar The Last Airbender. I'm Dan and I'm joined as always by Chris Billingham, the late airbender himself. Whoop whoop, give it up for Chris.
Holla.
How you feeling, Chris? You excited?
I'll be honest with you, Dan, like not just the table conversation, which potentially has made it into the podcast, but we've just chatted for about 40 minutes and I can barely remember the episode.
So that's okay. Well, look, we start this podcast with a recap, Chris.
Recap it for me, Dan.
So this, for those of you wondering, is Civil Wars Part 1. So this is the episode in which Korra, having seen the army arrive, confronts Unalaq and says, "Hey, buddy, this is quote for quote, this is verbatim. This is basically a clip from the show. She's like, "Yo, buddy, what the fuck's these ships all about?" And he replies, portals and shit." I don't know why I do this. It's the worst. It's never funny. So yeah, she sort of confronts Unalaq about the ships. He basically explains that it's to protect the portals, and that if you can open the portal on the other side of the world in the north, then it creates a link between the two tribes where you can travel between them instantly. We talked about this last week. We said portal means something. It's like a door. It's a path. It's a travel. It's a way to travel. It turns out Unalaq believes that if you go into this portal, you come out the other side, on the other side of the planet. This would link the two tribes in a much more practical way, and that he's just protecting it from their side until they can open the others. Still seems a little dictatory, a bit forceful, a bit unneeded to bring an army in, and so do the rest of the villagers, because it becomes clear that the rest of the people from the Southern Water Tribe are starting to talk about rebelling against what Unalaq is doing. Korra tries to talk down both sides. She's the Avatar. She wants to prevent a civil war from happening. It turns out that Varric, with Varric, money talks, and slimy as ever, and more interested in his business dealings than the actual politics of it, but I kind of love Varric for that. He's a great character. Sort of convinces a bunch of them to go ahead. Korra thinks her dad has potentially attacked or is about to attack Unalaq. She goes to stop him, but it's not her dad after all. Her dad didn't do it, but it's not mattering because Unalaq says he was probably part of the conspiracy part of it, even if he wasn't there for the fight, and is gonna put him on trial. Separate to that, we got Tenzin, got Vacation Tenzin. Looking for Iki, who's been missing with his siblings, and getting all their grievances out as they look, which I really enjoy. So that's the content of the episode, Chris. How did you feel about it?
I felt two big things. One, dodgy Rock, bit of a prick. Honestly, episode ends and I'm like, God, is he a contender for Knobhead Hall of Fame? And in the past, we've not let sort of arcing villains in Knobhead Hall of Fame, but it was a real prick this episode. That opening scene just felt like he was attempting to lead a cult. And it was like, okay, fine. That end scene, he's being a real prick.
Chris,
so that was big thought number one.
I've just looked. We have very consistently given it to 2 people per season.
Oh, really?
2 people from season 1 of Airbender, 2 people from season 2, season 3, and season 1 of this show. 2 people.
Run it down. What's the list?
Do you want to hear the list? So the old man who dubbed Harrow in it, imprisoned. Yep. We don't like that guy. Master Paku from the Northern Water Tribe from the first season because, the patriarchy and forcing the patriarchy on poor Katara. Then in the second season, return to Omashu, that fucking earthbending child, Tom Tom. That was your call. You did not like that kid. Appa's Lost Days, the circus guy for animal cruelty. That's fair, I think.
Oh, yeah, what a prick.
In the headband, there's a character called Hyde, who was the boyfriend of that girl that Aang was dancing with that got all jealous. We thought he was a real prick. Very possessive of his girlfriend. In the Southern Raiders, Yanra, the guy that literally said, "You know what? Don't if you want, I killed your mum. Don't kill me. Kill my mother instead." That guy really deserved to be in the Knobhead Hall of Fame. And then last year, Spirit of Competition was Tano from the Wolfbats for being arrogant. I made note that you particularly hated the way he told people to move out of his way with his hands. and then finally we added Hiroshi Sato from the episode Endgame when he was a real dickhead because he tried to murder his daughter, if memory serves.
Never great. We'll come back to whether it feels wrong, and especially with that list. One thing I hate about asking for the list is I know how much emphasis you put on me nominating a baby, which it's fair. I did nominate a child. That child was really annoying.
I know, I know, but it's never not funny. But also, as well, I like the level of detail I've put in some of these, like that description of you being particularly annoyed. Like, why did I write that down? Like, about the guy from the Wolfbats telling people to move with his hands. Like, that's such a weird detail. It's what you said, but it's such a weird detail to have noted down.
I don't think we can put an arcing villain in, but But my other big thing, and then we can dissect both or whatever. My other big thing is how engaged I was and how much I was enjoying the siblings plot with Tenzin. I wasn't particularly not up for it, but I did fear that, and I think I even spoke about it in one of these episodes. I did fear that we would spend any time we went to that, we would spend our time going, "Oh, come on, let's get back to the action." But actually, it was almost the opposite this week. I was like, "Oh no, I'm really enjoying the Tenzin stuff. Like, let's check that out. Like, oh yeah, fine. Dodgy Rock's dodgy. Like, whatever. Let's see what Tenzin and the siblings are up to. Like." That's fun. She's healing him with water like a mum. Like, that's cute. Like, yeah. So,
we can start there. Let's break down. So there's a huge amount of stuff that comes up in this episode, and a lot of it really doesn't make Aang look like necessarily the Father of the Year material. Now, no one is perfect at being a dad. No one, or a mum. Maybe just find the word parent, Dan, would be easier. No one is perfect at being a parent. Right. I guess I started with Dad because we were specifically talking about Aang, and then I was like, well, no, this applies generally, and I backtracked from there. It was good fun to watch it happen in real time, though, wasn't it, listeners? To listen to my brain die a death.
If you thought the listeners had fun listening to it in real time, you dissecting it for a minute or two after was even better.
Yeah.
Top quality podcast.
So no one's a perfect. No one's a perfect parent. It just doesn't happen. There's going to be things people get right and get wrong. And what I found really fascinating about this particular looking at things is, with everything they talked about, you kind of understood how that either was perceived or accidentally happened, even from Aang's perspective. So I'll list some of the stuff that comes up in this episode in terms of their griefs with each other, and we can talk about them. Specifically, Tenzin felt that Kaya only moved in with Katara after she'd spent time traveling and, finding herself, which I think Tenzin, who had the pressures and weight of the airbending culture on his shoulders, never felt like he had the freedom to do. Everything he had to choose to do with his life was because of that pressure. You know, he all the choices he made were to, you know, keep a culture alive, and that his dad put that on him. Whether he did it intentionally or not, that's how Tenzin feels about it. So he's like almost jealous of Kaya having that time to herself. Kaya and Bumi feel that Aang put all of his attention and focus on Tenzin to ensure that happened and to preserve the airbending culture, which you understand why Aang would have done. But then you do feel a little bit bad. Like when Tenzin's talking about all these vacations they went on, you know, and they're like, we didn't go on those. That was you and Dad. That's brutal. And then you've got the Bumi situation. The Bumi one is fascinating too, which is, you know, he was the oldest, he was the firstborn, but he's got a real chip on his shoulder about not being a bender. And overcompensates maybe in other ways, you know, exaggerates his stories, stuff like that. And I think, you know, and he feels as Kaya does about Tenzin as well. So, all of this gets talked about in a way that feels almost too real in this episode for me. Like it's so, I don't know, it's such an accurate portrayal of how siblings interact and reanalyze their pasts as well. It's just fascinating how much they all have different perspectives on their upbringing, but you can see how their upbringing shaped all of them individually, but also it's the same upbringing. Do you know what I mean? Like it's just really interesting to see how it's played out, and I think from a writing perspective, they clearly really thought all this through very deeply, and I think all those things are fascinating things to discover with these characters. So yeah, now I've sort of laid out the exact points that come up. Any particularly that caught you, or any thoughts on any of those particular items?
Yeah, I agree with you about it feeling very real, like that notion of dissecting and looking back, and just even like the language used and the way that looking back sort of happens. Like it's almost at first catty, and I'm not using catty in a negative way. They're right to be catty. I'm not saying they're wrong to be catty, but sort of catty references that then get sort of, well, hold on, what do you mean by that? And then get like picked apart and kind of, you know, the wounds get pulled open a little bit, and then they're dissected, and then it's like, you know, 2 against 1 and all that sort of stuff. So yeah,
and then it flickers and there's more infighting.
Yeah, and I really loved the balance of that kind of more dramatic stuff, but also the humour that was really used in those moments. Like, you know, especially at the beginning when it's like, hey, we finally get to see Vacation Tenzin, and he's on like a deck chair and stuff like that. I thought the writing of that subplot was done really well and balanced really well, which, you know, is hard to do, you know, especially when, you know, the show itself is only 24 minutes. They had like what? Let's say they got half the story, which I don't think they did necessarily. Didn't. But even if they did, you've got 12 minutes to do all that with nuance and like subtlety, but also clarity. Like, great.
Yeah, like I really feel like I get a sense of what went wrong with their upbringings that has led them to this point. And again, it doesn't feel inconsistent either, because often a risk you run when you have characters having a discussion like this where they're re-examining their upbringing is they can have such disparate experiences. You sort of think, well, someone here is either lying or like there's an inconsistency. If both of these people are right, there's an inconsistency in how this is being written. Do you know what I mean? Like, it can't be both of these things. They're such different ends of the spectrum. But this was all really well selected, where actually all of these emotional problems are spawning from the same decisions. Right? They all have different issues, but it's all coming back to, you know, the pressure Aang put on Tenzin, but also the attention Aang gave to Tenzin. They're the same thing, right? You know, and it fucked up Tenzin in one way, and it fucked up Kaya in another. Like, you know what I mean? And then the idea of being the Avatar's son and not having a bending ability, yeah, that's gonna fuck up Bumi. Like they're all messed up in their own little ways, which is exactly how everyone ends up. You know, everyone's parents have done some level of damage to them without realizing. I don't think there's a person on this planet that is 100% perfectly well-adjusted, you know, perfect parenting. It just doesn't exist. You know, we're all just figuring it out all the time. Some people get it right, you know, maybe more right than others, but it's so it's going to be degrees. But I'm really glad the show hasn't deified Aang and made Aang out to be some sort of perfect paragon of parenting. Say that 70 times fast. But but that is, I think that's great, because the show, it makes so much sense to me if you've got a famous parent that the world would see your parent different to you. I like that idea too. To the world, Aang is this on a pedestal, this incredible guiding light of wisdom and and strength, and was able to end a war and unite the world, and built Republic City with his bare bloody hands or whatever, and also revitalized a culture. Like, he's basically he's been sort of he's become an icon, but like he's become like, I don't know. It's what happens in our world when when a well-loved celebrity passes away. They shift into the world of myth, right? Like Zoe Bowie or Duncan Jones, as he goes by in his film career, must hate and love that shadow of his dad that exists in the public consciousness, but that doesn't represent his real actual dad, the man that raised him and he grew up with. So I really like that these guys aren't falling for the perception of Aang in the wider public world. They're not. He's passed. They're not deifying him. They're remembering the real human being that was at the center of that, and discussing him quite openly and quite happily, being honest about his flaws. And I think also from the show's perspective, it would have been very tempting for the writers to imply that Aang was some sort of perfect godlike being after going through all the adventures. But they're not deifying their own show, and they're not deifying the lead. They're being very honest about his mistakes.
Yeah, and but do you imagine, is there a world? Because I'm with you. I love that. Like, I love that notion. I think it's handled really well. I think it's done. Mm-hmm. It's executed really interestingly. But do you think there's a world where some fans want Aang to be that godlike figure, and actually, discussing his flaws isn't appealing to some people watching this show?
Yeah, I think so. But I think sometimes the appealing idea isn't always the right idea for the story, right? I think, and for the story you're telling, I think I think the same problem, and I hate to bring it back into discussion, but the same problem occurs with Last Jedi all the time.
Yeah, I was just about to say the same thing. I was just about to be like, not to open a Last Jedi can of worms.
Yeah,
but Luke, right? Like, it's so fucking baffling to me. Yeah, anyway.
But it's exactly the same problem. You've hit on the same notion, right? You've got a character that fans love, who was the hero of the previous era of that, that story, right? Who's moved on now into sort of a mentor role. He's an iconic figure, even in the world. He's never going to live up to that because he's a person, and that's way more interesting from a storytelling perspective than making him that icon. If he was just doing loads of flips and being awesome all the time.
Was the, and I understand and appreciate why people might disagree with this, but it was that notion of like, well, Luke would never do that. And it's like, yeah, but if someone watched, God help them, the prequels first, they're saying exactly the same thing when Yoda's introduced in The Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah.
They're going, what the fuck? This was like our kick-ass hero, like, did all he can to, like, what? He's been hiding in a cave. Like,
yeah, he fought the Emperor, now he's being goofy and, like acting like a Muppet. Like, yeah.
Luke and Yoda literally did the same thing. How could you say there's no precedent? Obi-Wan did it. Obi-Wan hid in a fucking cave for years.
Yeah. And I think, and I just think you've got to let the writers tear down the heroes to examine them. You can't. There's no interesting story in a perfect person. There just isn't. There's just no story there at all. And they've got to be free to make mistakes, or they're not characters. They're not people.
Aang was never. I think the difficulty is Aang was never perfect in the original. But the problem is Aang's flaws in the original were very much childlike flaws.
Yes.
He couldn't concentrate. He didn't want to pay attention. He was restless. He was a bit impatient. He was a bit arrogant. So they're like, the character we're seeing is flawed, but they're flawed as a child, whereas now what we're exploring is how Aang was flawed as an adult, how he was flawed as a what is that word, Dan? Parent, that's it. As a parent.
Let me just add Knobhead Hall of Fame, Chris, for that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's true of Luke too, though, isn't it? I think, when a character goes on an arc that's very much to do with youthful, either arrogance or brashness or whatever you want to put it down to, right? If it's to do with their youth, when the story is over, as they're hitting quote unquote, manhood, adulthood, depending on the character, you create a situation where it's like, well, the arc is over, and they're now a grown up. Those flaws, to the mind's eye of the fan, gone, right? Yeah. Like, it's easy to imagine that Aang, having been through all he's been through, figured it all out, and he'd figured out all of his flaws, and he'd worked out, like, that was his character arc, was becoming this, like, becoming this incredible paragon of peace and hope and whatever, all these amazing things that people probably assume. But I like the idea of tearing down the heroes. I like the idea of, the myth of a person, the legend that follows in the footsteps of a person like that never really represents the real person, who will have been flawed, who will have made mistakes, will have had doubts, it's just way more interesting. And again, if you were to commit to that, not only are you mythologizing your own show and putting your own, your own story onto a pedestal, which is a terrible thing to do. If you're Rian Johnson and you're putting Star Wars on a pedestal, or if you're, Mikey and Bri, as we've been friendly, dubbed them on this show, them doing it with Last Airbender when it's their own material, either way, doesn't make for good storytelling. It just doesn't. It never does. No. Because you're either, it just feels like a love letter to a thing, which is like, it's nice when stuff can feel like that naturally, but if you're sacrificing the story for that, because you don't want to touch the toys, you're like, oh no, they're too precious, then, tell a different story. Go do something different. You're not fit to tell that. Or you're doing it with your own material, and that's even worse, because then it becomes egotistical. Because you might be accidentally implying that your original thing is the perfect thing. And that's not right either. So yeah, I love the way this has worked, and I think it makes for a really, God, they're getting all this stuff out of their chests now. We're only 3 episodes into the season. Where does this go now?
Yeah, and I think I hit the mic when you started talking there, so apologies if that was loud on mic. I bent down and my headphones hit it. I think the other impressive thing about the story is we're talking in the context of people that have seen Avatar. I think the other thing that I really like about this is I'm pretty sure this storyline would work without anyone having to see Avatar. Like, it's a parental figure that didn't do right by these children. How often have we seen that and not known the parental figure? Like, I think that's the other really impressive thing about this story. I think it's added to if you know Avatar, mm-hmm. but it's still being explored beautifully, even if you hadn't. And I think the fact that it's a storyline so dependent on Aang that I maintain could work. Well, at least from what I've seen so far of it, could work without you seeing Avatar. I think that as well is really impressive. I think if you were in that position, you'd probably be wanting to see more from Katara. You'd probably want Katara to come into this a bit more and explore her as well. But, if you take this episode, for example, I think this episode would work if you hadn't seen Avatar.
Yeah.
Well, that plot of this episode, obviously.
Yeah, I agree. I think, a simple story of siblings, that don't spend a lot of time together, sort of getting some stuff off their chest like this is very going to be very relatable, and regardless of the specific context of the world or whatever. Yeah, absolutely, people are going to relate to it, for sure. And again, that's what we talked about. It all felt so real, it all felt so authentic, and that isn't just in the idea, but also very much in this case in the execution. It's one thing, and a very good thing, to be smart enough to identify what might be the struggles of Aang's kids. Again, they're so clever, such clever ideas. Even if you just focus on one of them, like Boomy, being the son of the Avatar, master of all four elements, and not being able to bend, you would definitely overcompensate. Right? Whether Aang put that on him or not, the world would put that on him. And we got a glimpse of that last week too. So it's it's just such a simple thing. But then to hear him talk about it, the idea is communicated so cleanly and so authentically in this particular episode. So it's it's the double hit, isn't it? It's like the good idea, and then it's executed really well. So yeah, I love all the stuff this week with Tenzin. Any thoughts on the actual sort of, I guess, plot of that, which is that they're out searching Iki's gone missing? Any thoughts on that situation at all, or?
Well, I suppose that situation sort of gets forgotten about, doesn't it?
Well, this is a part one, isn't it, of a two-part episode? So that plot I feel like would have been resolved if this had just been a normal single episode. But because it's a two-parter, I feel like they felt comfortable to let that plot run.
Just so I'm clear, because I don't know, Nate, that's the child that we've already seen in with all the statues, getting in awe of the Aang statue, yeah, or another statue.
Yeah, there was a second statue that she saw at the end of last episode. I think that was Iki, or maybe that was Jinora. No, I think that was Iki. That's who's gone missing. I'm sure. Let me double check.
Must be right.
I'm going to double check that to make sure that we've got the. Oh no, it was Jinora. Jinora found the statue. Jinora's fine. Iki's the one they've gone after.
Oh, I assumed something had happened to the one who was with the statue, and that's why she's missing. Okay, well, other than being confused by that, I look forward to seeing how those stories come together. But I thought in my head, we'd had a little peek of where they were. So, but okay.
Yeah.
I guess the honest answer is to the question, what did you think of that, is not much. Because I was then distracted with where the story actually went.
Right. Yeah, I guess that was just facilitating the so we'll come back to the Iki Jinora of it all next week, I guess, when we get the conclusion to that story. I think it's a fine setup, though, daughter missing. Wandered off, got a bit lost in the mountains. And it gave Boomy a chance to, exaggerate about his past. I love that. I wrote that line down. When he says, I may have added a typhoon or two for dramatic effect. What I really like about that is actually, because that is what Tenzin has just said, is 3 typhoons seems, not plausible or something like that. And because he replies, I may have added a typhoon or 2, that basically means he added all the extra typhoons were all fictional. Yeah. There was a typhoon.
Yeah, or even no typhoon. I like the notion in my head canon it's no typhoon.
Yeah, the typhoon was added. So I really enjoyed that. So that's good time. Is there anything else on that side, or should we move on to the Korra side of the plot? I think we're covered.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, for sure. What did you think about the Korra side of the plot, Dan?
So I really like this, because I think this is forcing Korra to come up with the thing she's the worst at, which is dealing with people and conflict. Korra is a blunt object as an avatar. She has been able to physically go in and, use her force to get her way in the past. When Amon took over the city, she didn't negotiate that situation down. She fought her way out of that one. And one of the things we got to see Aang do multiple times across the series. Now, Aang did have an advantage in that there was episode of the week storylines, right? So, you can do an episode that doesn't end in conflict, where he can talk his way out of the situation, because you can have an episode like that because you've got 20 and pick one. Do that, right? But it's not a skill set Korra's really gotten to demonstrate, diplomacy, and what I liked about this week was it forced her to almost discover she's not good at that. Because what essentially happened is, her dad and uncle, different sides of this. She tries to talk reason to her uncle. And what she says is true. She says, you're risking civil war to have these forces here. They're probably not needed. Maybe just send them home to avoid this sparking an actual conflict. And that is, she said the right thing, I guess. But he manipulated her, he nudged her. She went into that conversation trying to get him to get his troops off the street because it was sending the wrong message. And it ends with him manipulating her into feeling like it's her job to stop the war from happening, not his. You know, well, my troops are welcome to be here. If you want to stop a war from happening, go talk to your dad. You know, this is on you. You know, I can't possibly stop this war. Only you can. You know, this is you. And she gets turned around, and he manipulated her. And you know, a more experienced Avatar, a better Avatar in terms of like that negotiation side of things, will have clocked that and been like, no. You know, this is the negotiation. This is me telling you right now, you need to get your troops off the street. You know, but instead she bought into that and turned it around. And then started investigating these rebels. So I really like that the show basically challenged Korra to be a diplomat, and she failed. And then the episode, you know, degrades into a combat situation. You know, now admittedly, it's a pretty small scale little scrap that happens. I believe the original intention was for this episode to contain a much larger scale battle, but production restrictions and budget restrictions led to it being a much smaller scale. You know, just a couple of people inside that place situate, you know, Korra versus like 3 or 4 guys, rebels. But it still ends up leading to fisticuffs. And I think it's a really interesting situation to put Korra in, which is to challenge her to do something she's not been previously good at and let her fail at it. You know, that's the sort of meat and potatoes of what goes on this episode. And I just really thought that was a good step in her journey. You know, letting her explore that and realize that, you know, is not something she's good at. Although I'm not sure she's quite realized it yet, but that's definitely what we observed as an audience. So yeah, I really like that plot. I think it's really good. I think also making it her dad and her uncle makes the whole thing a lot more tense, because these are people she knows as well. So yeah, I thought that was all really interesting.
Yeah, and I thought, you know, watching Dodgy Rock's masterful manipulation of her, well, until like the end, where hopefully it's fucking blown apart, and like the look on her face as her dad was being arrested, even though he didn't do anything, suggests she might finally be seeing the man he is. Which I don't know. That's a question. Like, I don't, obviously, well, it's a question I can't answer because it all depends on the conclusion. But I was surprised to be seeing that beat in episode 3. You know, at the end of episode 3, potentially, she's going, no, you're a bit dodgy. That's earlier than I was expecting that beat to come, if I'm honest. Now, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I haven't seen the execution of it. It might be genius. It might be amazing. I might be wrong on her realising that. All these things are possibilities. But I definitely wouldn't have predicted that we would reach that moment so quickly. Not necessarily, again, annoyed that we have or sad that we have, because it could lead to some really good drama. And I like the idea of, you know, her going against him. But and also, actually, I suppose maybe, you know, last year we had a guy serenading as a good guy who was actually a bit of a bad guy. So maybe they don't want to, you know, repeat those beats to some degree. We also had brothers last year, actually, thinking about it. So yeah, but there's parallels there. But yeah, I was surprised to get the ending so quickly. But watching it unfold, I really enjoyed, and I think it just shows again the power of the subplot. As you say, there's no real huge action set piece in this, but it was still very captivating and very enjoyable. And, you know, that's also partly because of the other subplot involving Marco, which we'll get to, or Bolin. I still get confused. Bolin. But yeah, no, I really enjoyed that. And it really also earned its title Civil War as well. It definitely felt, again, the nuances and the disagreements and the feelings and the rawness and how political this episode felt. Again, for 24 minutes that also had 2 other plots going on. Fantastic stuff.
Yeah, because actually, thinking about it, Unalaq manipulates her twice also, right? Because even when, after the rebels have been caught, and he's like, "Thank you, Avatar, for saving my life," he's like, you know, they'll be in prison forever, or whatever he says. And she's like, well, no, they should stand trial, because otherwise you're going to turn them into martyrs for their cause. You know, and she thinks she's getting her way, and he's giving her what she's asking for. He's like, well, I will respect the Avatar's wishes. You know, he's seeming reasonable. We will put them on trial. But at that point, you know, he knows what he's really going for, which is he's going to go after the leaders of this rebellion. And even though Korra's dad, it turns out, you know, backed out before it got as far as the attack on Unalaq, Unalaq still considers him one of the conspirators responsible for it and arrests him. And it's like, you know, oh yes, Avatar Korra, we'll do a trial. Yes, you'll get your way. And now it's kind of like her own fault that that's happening. And it makes a lot of sense that, you know, because her dad was part of those very early discussions about rebelling, you know, to the point where he even says when Korra comes back in and they have their moment of sort of reconciliation, which I really like as well. We'll talk about that in a minute. But I like that scene a lot. But when he sort of explains it, he sort of says it's the moment he found out how far Varric was willing to go, was the moment he bowed out, which means he knew and did nothing. So Tonraq didn't, you know, he didn't act perfectly. You know, he chose to be neutral, and that is commendable. He chose to not be part of an assault on, you know, a diplomat from the other tribe, you know, and his brother. But, like, wait a minute, like, you still chose to keep your mouth shut about it, though, which is, you know, silence is as much as, you know, it is potentially on the list of, you know, that's potentially crime-worthy, you know, like knowing that something's going to happen and being like, oh, I'm just going to keep my mouth shut and let it play out. You know, that's not great either. So I think, you know, Unalaq might have a case to say he was part of the conspiracy, you know, because he kind of was. He knew it was happening. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out in that next episode because they've laid it out really interestingly. But again, they're writing a really believable amount of manipulation on Unalaq's part because every time he switches Korra around or gives Korra an inch, but really he's like got he's got this other thing under his sleeve. You know, you see how he's making her feel respected and listened to, but then taking with the other hand at the same time. And it just makes it very believable. You're not going, Korra, you idiot. This guy is obviously up to no good. I think even now you go, well, yeah, I guess if there was a conspiracy to have you kidnapped, potentially murdered, yeah, you'd probably want those people to go to trial. Like he's not, you know, he's not necessarily being that unreasonable. They found a way to, you know, turn up the drama without outright making him a villain again. And we'll have to come back to this very episode because it ties very heavily into a question we had from well, not a question we had, but some feedback we had from last series. So we'll be coming back to this point a little bit later in this very same podcast. But I think that's fascinating because you do understand all of Unalaq's motives here in this situation. Again, a lot of actually surprisingly quite subtle writing is gone into making this whole function, and I think it's doing a really good job. I'm pleasantly surprised because this season gets a bit of a bad reputation. It's one of the weaker seasons, and you know we'll see where it ends up going in the long run. But at least these first couple episodes, man, all the setup has been very promising and very well executed. A lot of really interesting ideas being explored in a very good way.
Yeah, definitely. And speaking of those. Obviously, another one for the list is the subplot.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear you talk about this. I just want to know what you think on this one because so for those who don't remember, this is the subplot where Bolin is trying to break up with Eska. I'm so curious. Again, how did you feel about it?
I just thought it was really funny. Like it's perfectly executed comic relief. I think it's quite horrifying to see. I really feel for Bolin. Like, you know, it's like, I've tried, but every time she threatens to freeze me and chuck me down the, like, do you know what I mean? It's like, oh, God. Like I say, you really feel for him. But it's especially the dinner date I really laughed at, you know, especially when he's like...
The 5-person double date.
Yeah, when he's like, we never get to go out, just the 5 of us.
Yeah. Fucking great.
And when he's like, oh, so you'll be leaving? And they're like, no, yes, but you'll be coming with us to stay forever with us. And it's like, oh, God. And I just love how quickly, you know, there's a real Curb Your Enthusiasm-esque vibe from Bolin of, I've made a mistake here.
It's the Arrested Development thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
I've made a terrible mistake. Like it's you can just see it. Big fan. I think it's a really good plot. I like what it does for Bolin. I like Bolin and Esker for comedic relief. And I've had friends in that situation where they've been in a relationship they were desperately trying to get out of and not being able to really quite figure out a way out that's clean and doesn't hurt anyone's feelings. And it's a situation only like really sweetly nice or maybe even naively nice people get themselves into. But it's quite funny to see, and it's being explored in a way that's both like half joking, but also with the one eye on like, this relationship's getting really messed up. So you also feel quite sorry for Bolin at the same time as you're laughing, and that's a funny little balancing act they've gotten right so far. And it's just very entertaining to see play out, and it really does tie an episode together that has got quite a lot of otherwise heavy stuff. Either the politics of the Korra side, the very human situation with the siblings, and then you've got this sort of like sprinkling of comedy throughout that really helps tie it all together, so it doesn't all feel too heavy, because I think otherwise this episode might be. Perfectly balanced, well told. Thumbs up.
Really enjoyed it.
I also enjoyed the action scene. There's only one, but it's pretty short, but it's really good. It's when Korra goes in to stop the rebels from taking Unalaq, Dodgy Rock, as Chris would call him. And there's like a fight sequence inside this building, and like Korra like wraps them up in like a thing that she pulls from the ceiling, and like it's I don't know. There's something very kind of almost classic Avatar about a bender on bender fight. It feels like, I don't know, because it was quite a creative fight. Maybe that's why it felt like classic Avatar, because it wasn't just like what we talked about in the previous season with particularly the pro bending, where it's like just people throwing their various elements at each other, which makes sense. You want to restrict the rules of a competition like that. But it was really cool to see them fighting in a way that required some creativity for once, like making walls and bashing through them, and like all sorts of fun stuff like that. So I really enjoyed seeing that battle, and I thought it was really well executed, visually interesting. The movements were all really smooth, well animated. So yeah, big thumbs up to the action scene too.
Yeah, I thought it was good. I thought that worked really well. Did you have those are kind of all my points? Did you have any other notes, Dan?
I think the last thing that I wanted to talk about. I wanted to give a little nod to they reference a few different. Before I get onto the slightly larger point, I'll just quickly say I did write down as well that I liked the references to the original series in this. So he took Tenzin to Kyoshi Island to ride elephant koi, which is something young Aang did. They also talk about visiting Ember Island, which is obviously a big part of the original series as well. And I just thought there was two little subtle but nice references to the wider world. I was literally Captain America at those moments. I was like, I understood that reference. Yeah, very good. Yes, agreed. That's good. At one point, Korra says to her mother, "Unalaq's the only one who believes in me," which I thought was a really good way to show how he's manipulated her by always giving her something in return. He never just asks her to blindly follow him, like both Tenzin and even last year. I've forgotten the character's name. The politician that turned out to be the brother of Ammon. Names are just escaping me at the moment, but yeah, he sort of tried to get Korra on his task force, and it worked initially, but then he like asked more of her than he was giving her, whereas Unalaq has been a lot smarter to give as much as he's taken, which has led to Korra feeling listened to by him. And again, I just think that's clever writing.
Yeah, I'd agree.
He claims the troops are to protect the spirit portal, but I ask the question, who would be interested in doing it harm? Who's he protecting it from? And why is Korra not asking that question when he says that? I wrote that down.
But I think...
I found that interesting.
Well, I think there's a lot of questions Korra isn't asking, isn't there?
That's true.
Like, when all those ships come, the first that comes to mind is, what the fuck? But I mean, we cut at the end last week. Maybe she did turn to him and say that.
Well, this episode opens with the
question.
what the fuck moment where she's like, "Why are all these ships here?" And his response is, "They're here to protect the portal. We've opened it now." And like, I think she needs to be asking the question, "Protect from who?" Because you're not besieged. We're not fighting off the Fire Nation anymore. The Air Nomads are basically a bunch of non-bending acolytes. So you think the Earth Kingdom is coming for it? You think the Fire Nation's got? Who do you think's coming for this? Like, and for what reason? Like, there's no answer to the question of who and who we're protecting it from. Are you protecting it from the rest of the Southern Water Tribe? Because that feels Civil War-y to me. There's at no point it just feels like such an obvious question to ask.
It just mind melting. It leans into the theory that it's fundamentally manipulation.
Right. Yeah, she's trusting him. He's given her so much rope. Yeah. And that is good. And I think that is interesting. She does have a certain amount of trust for him and what he's up to. But yeah, I did find that weird. The only other note I've got is about Korra, finally talking to her parents and having that nice sweet little moment at the end of the episode where she because obviously she fell out with her dad a bit last week. She fell out with him again this week because if he was involved in the rebel stuff, and she sort of like, they had a nice moment after Korra discovers that her dad didn't go ahead with the attack. I just liked that moment of the family coming together, even if it is then spoiled by our final reveal of Unalaq putting him on trial. I really liked that. I thought that was nice.
Yeah, again, slightly torn. That lends into what I was saying earlier. I guess, and I don't judge the show because I don't know what comes next, but I guess I expected that to be the finale or be later. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It felt like they'd almost only just fallen out to then reconcile.
Right. Yeah, and whether that's a good or bad choice will really be determined by, is where they go next more interesting than that?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, sure.
If you're closing off that plot this soon, then hopefully the thing you're replacing it with is as, or if not more, interesting.
Yeah, exactly that.
So, should we stick the trivia for this episode out of the way, and then we'll get to the feedback from last series?
Yep. In that case, Dan, let's triv it up!
I'm going to give you some trivia. So, the episode title is, of course, a double entendre. I'm not sure is that the right word for this, but yeah, it has double meaning, obviously, because it's referring to both the Civil War happening at the Water Tribe, but also the Civil War happening between Tenzin and his own family. We talked about that last week, but that is true and clever. Milo commenting on Boomy's stomach and asking if he's pregnant, which is one of my favourite moments of the episode, is actually apparently based on a real situation between Brian Konietzko's nephew and father. So I like that. That's very funny. When acting out Desna and Esker's chortling, Aaron Himmelstein and Aubrey Plaza's direction from the script was simply weird, bizarre laughter. And they nailed it.
I mean, as always, Aubrey Plaza nailed that, didn't they?
Yep. So good. Like they both did. That, when they're both snickering weirdly to themselves, it's one of the most uncomfortable things. It's so weird.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so we did already talk about this, but I'll read it out just in full. The creators wanted to have a larger riot between the Southern Water Tribe citizens and the Northern Water Tribe soldiers, rather than the small, scattered incidents depicted in the episode, but were unable to do so given the limitations of the production. No bueno, Nickelodeon. Give them some fucking money. I know you've not got a lot of confidence in the show, but how about you give them the fucking money? Because you're just begging for the show to not be good. That, like, you know what I mean? Like, if your concern is that people won't watch the show, making it worse isn't going to help that. Like, you've just got to give them a little bit of trust and a little bit of fucking money.
Yeah, for sure, completely.
You're just shooting it in the knees before you even let it go running. You know,
that's the flawed system, my friend, isn't it?
Korra subduing the rebels by wrapping them up with nearby objects was inspired by the action sequences in the films of Jackie Chan.
Nice.
He's often using like real world objects in his fights, isn't he? I seem to recall like things where like he's fighting in an office and he'd like put a bin on the end of his foot and then kick them in the head with it. So it's like it's not just his foot colliding with them; it's the bin. Like it's stuff like that. Like or like I seem to recall a fight where he's like fighting around and through a ladder. Like he's throwing punches through the runs of the ladder and then ducking out of the way and stuff. But Jackie Chan was very much like in the movie. Oh, we got to do some of his stuff on Rewind Reviews. Actually, we've not done a Jackie Chan film yet. I love Jackie Chan films growing up. We'll do like a Rumble in the Bronx or something. But yeah, he was very much about like his fights were all about using the world around him as part of the fight. So that's a nice little nod. I like that. And then finally, the moment where Kaya and Tenzin descend the cliff using their bending. Apparently came from the network asking Michael Dante DiMartino to include more bending in the episode. Although in this case, DiMartino enjoyed the opportunity to show some sort of combat-based bending. Just some practical, real-world use of bending. So that was a network note that didn't really bother anyone.
Fair play. But they do happen sometimes.
Yeah, every now and then the network have an idea and you go, oh yeah, good point. Every now and then it seems that's what that seems to be what we hear from the creatives, is that every now and then they get it right. So let's talk about the feedback from last series. Chris, would you like to do your thing? Do the thing.
List the feedback, analyzing it in retrospect. Yep.
Hi, I'm Dan, and welcome to feedback from last series. That is fucking incredible. that was. God, that was glorious. I don't even know where to start, Chris. I'm just gonna clap.
Thank you, mate. Thank you. I really appreciate that.
I'm putting all my thoughts and emotions into this.
Which I appreciate.
Well, the problem with the single clap is no matter how sincerely I mean it, it will always sound sarcastic.
Oh, yeah. No, absolutely. The single clap always is going to feel that way.
Mm-hmm. So next time I'm going to bring a whole audience. This podcast was recorded before a live audience. So, the feedback in question this week, there were versions of this echoed from a few different commenters. YouTube, Twitter, Discord, all those places. In fact, I can slip in the places you can give us comments now, so we can. Oh God, this is almost too good, Chris. If you'd like to give us feedback at any point to be part of a segment like this, you're welcome to get us in a few different places. We're on Twitter. We don't always reply to those anymore because we don't use Twitter as much, but it's at Dan Doolan, at C Billingham, at Nothing But Static without the G for the main sort of podcast channel. I've tried to set up notifications, and every now and then I log back in and have a glance, so I will potentially see them, just not quickly, but I guess in this scenario that's fine. You can also go to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/NothingButStaticUK, where you can like and subscribe and all that good stuff, but also there'll be a video post of this exact episode if you're listening to this on an audio platform, and there's obviously a comment section underneath. You're welcome to dive in there, or if you'd have thoughts, you can get us on mail at nothingbutstatic.co.uk. You can also, of course, use our patreon.com/nothingbutstatic, to get access to our Discord server, which is where this particular comment comes from. So this is from Punkfish, who is a long-time listener and all-round great guy. Cue the news article about Punkfish murdering a bunch of people or something. And he was definitely endorsed. Sorry, it's he/they. So sorry, they were definitely they were definitely endorsed by Dan Doolan on the Nothing But Static and Analysing Avatar podcasts before the spree. I'm a bad person. I'm sorry. That is a joke that is both in bad taste, but also I'm not going to not do it because it amused me, which makes me a bad person.
But before the spree is a phrase I've never heard before, but I very much enjoyed.
I'm very sorry to Punkfish. I did not wish to cast aspersions on you and basically dub you a murderer. Anyway, dumb shit aside, why do people let me do this? It's madness. We had some feedback all relating to our discussion last year, about protagonists with a legitimate motive. Right? We talked a lot about this because Amon's point was that historically in the bending world, there had been imbalance, right? Benders led everything, whether it was governments or like institutions, like even the Fire Nation, obviously run by a long line of bending sort of family royalty almost. The Earth Kingdom. I'm not sure if anyone ever clarified if the Earth King could earthbend or not, but we talked about this a lot last season because that was a big part of Amon's tactic. But the point made it. Well, actually, let me just. I'll read it because it's probably. I would like to represent Punkfish's comment correctly, but this was echoed in a couple of different bits of feedback we got. So I just thought this is a really good way to phrase it. So this is the one I've stuck with. Because your main point is good villain fighting for a cause that they don't, but they just do it the wrong way. Let me line this up so I can read it clearly. From here on, spoilers for season 1. It's revealed in season 1 they aren't actually fighting for said cause, which is why their methods are so stupid in the first place. From my perspective, it very much weakens the antagonist, because now they are nothing more than a powerful brat. That's a really interesting point. In the first season, we talked a lot about Amon having that political view as the basis for their movement, and that being potentially like, a good thing, a sort of good cause to fight. Maybe they're going about it the wrong way by being like, a weird terrorist cell. But actually, in the end, it kind of becomes a power grab. It was a power grab. It becomes clear Amon didn't really necessarily even believe the things he was saying because he himself was a bender. Does that undermine that entire point of a villain that has a point but handles it wrong? Because we compared that villain to like, what's his face from Black Panther, Killmonger. Because he again had the right point but was going about it the wrong way. But by the end of the series, that's actually no longer true. Did they undermine themselves there? Did they hurt their own argument? And I'm curious to what you think on this, Chris.
I don't think they hurt their own argument. I'd have to take it in a bit more. What do you think?
Yeah, it's a really good point. I think it does maybe potentially weaken the villain. Because if he was to watch the series back now, you'd be watching it the whole time going, well, he doesn't believe in this. He's just taken a political ideology. And it is a different kind of villain, and that's a valid version too, right? It's very villainous to take a legitimate political ideology and twist it for power, but it becomes a different story when you do it that way. So rewatching the season will probably play quite differently to first viewing, if you keep that in mind. Knowing Amon's not actually believing in the stuff he's saying. I don't know if it weakens the villain, because I think it makes him quite villainous. Arguably even more so.
Do you think the way they...
But maybe less nuanced.
But is that also done, and I'm struggling, I'll be completely honest, I'm struggling slightly to remember the nuances of the storylines, hence partly my, what do you think answer? But because you've watched it more times than me, but isn't that already slightly... in the end, it all comes down to family. It all comes down to resentment to how they were raised anyway. Do you know what I mean? So I don't know how much of it was about those beliefs anyway by the end of the series. But that might be me watching it once a year ago and not really remembering. No,
you're exactly correct. But that's kind of, I guess the thing people are saying is we complimented the show for having a villain with a legitimate point. But it turns out by the end of the series, the point was just his excuse to grab power. Does that weaken the nuance of those early episodes that we were complimenting it on for having that idea of a villain with a real point? Because Killmonger, to borrow the example we ourselves used when discussing it, even at the end when he's defeated, he still believes in the ideology that he was putting forward, and he was so correct that even our lead character T'Challa learns that lesson from him and makes changes as a result of Killmonger's ideology. So I don't think it necessarily weakens the character as a villain. I think if anything, it's more villainous to hop onto a real life political social issue for personal gain. So I don't think it hurts Amon as a villain to do that. But I do think it does undercut that idea earlier in this season of the show. And that might feel a little hollower watching it back. I think maybe that's what it is. So, because I still think that's a deeply terrible behavior. So it certainly doesn't hurt him as a bad guy. Because, bad guy doing bad thing. But yeah, I do think it maybe does hurt that thing we were complimenting in those early episodes of the show. And I do wonder on a rewatch, would that harm it? I'm not sure. Because, or would I just be even more angry at the villain? Because I'd be like, oh, he's a real bastard, isn't he? Look at him manipulating all these people. He doesn't even believe the shit he's shoveling.
Which again, is very similar beats to this series, isn't it? You've got someone manipulating a load of people. I think we should, I don't know how we can necessarily, but try and keep an eye on how many parallels there actually are between Series 1 and Series 2 on this show.
Yeah, there do seem to have been quite a few. You're not wrong. We've got a sort of we've got two characters who are siblings, sort of with two different ends of a belief system that are coming to a head. We have a character that's sort of manipulating a political situation. Maybe we don't yet know if that's for personal gain. He might really believe that the Northern and Southern Water Tribes haven't, been spiritually imbalanced and haven't been spiritually imbalanced for a while, and that the opening the portals will help. He might really believe in the political stuff he's talking about. We don't know yet, so it's hard for us to compare to Amon, they're manipulating, yes, but two very different kinds of manipulation. One was successfully manipulating dozens and dozens of people to a political cause, whereas this guy is manipulating one particular person and making them a sort of tool for him to achieve his aims. But his aims still might be legit, maybe. Maybe his goals are still his goals. Does that make sense? Maybe he does genuinely believe all the stuff he's saying. So maybe he is a villain that's good idea, gone about it the wrong way. Or right
that
idea.
Makes sense.
I guess we'll have to keep track of his morality and his belief system and see how that plays out going forward. But yeah, I think it's a great point, and I think a lot of people raised it, and I think there were some really smart people with some really very, as always, our listeners are smarter than we are, and we were just the idiots who picked up the microphone. We always appreciate the feedback and keep sending it in. We don't have an answer to that one. That's when it's a really good point. When you're like, oh god, it's such an interesting idea, but I genuinely don't even know for sure where I land on it.
Yeah, and I feel like I've not added much. Apologies, it's me not remembering the nuance and not necessarily wanting to get it wrong.
Yeah, well, which is better than you just blundering through if you don't remember. I would much rather you. I think everyone would much rather you do that than pretend. If you took a really harsh stance on a subject that you didn't remember, that would be way worse.
Yeah, although you accused them of murdering, so you know what I mean. It would have to be a really harsh stance for me to be more harsh than you were at the beginning of this section.
I'm so sorry, Pugfish. I did accuse you of murder. I used the word spree. So let's be honest. I accused you of murders.
Yes, yeah. Serial killings.
It was supposed to be a joke, but it got well out of hand. This is what happens. I shouldn't be allowed to do this. You should all just cancel your Patreon subscriptions. Just stop this madness.
No, don't do that. And in fact, Dan, if you did want to give on Patreon, how would you go about that?
Well, you go to patreon.com/nothingbutstatic UK, where you would get, for as little as $1 a month, access to episodes of this very podcast 1 week early, also access to our Rewind Reviews podcast 1 week early, and access to special bonus content.
Woo!
I know, we spoil them, don't we, really? Obviously, you can give more if you would like, but $1 a month is sort of like minimentary. We don't have tiers. Well, okay, physically we have tiers to allow people to give more if they would like to or can afford to give more, but we always say, we borrow the thing that they say on the Weekly Planet, because I think it's really accurate, which is just give whatever that if it fell out of your pocket, you wouldn't notice it was gone. That's the amount to give, and never more. And if that's just $1, then that's wonderful, and we love you for it. And if it's nothing at all, then that's also great. If any penny missing from your bank account would be an issue for you, absolutely do not support us financially. You can support us if you want to in the other ways of liking and subscribing, and going on the podcast platform of your choice, and reviewing the podcast, or telling a friend, or just continuing to listen at all is a wonderful thing. So feel no pressure, no obligation ever with the Patreon. It is just there to take a little bit of the sting out of the bills we pay for this hobby we have. That's all it's for. And it does. We break even now, which is maybe a little over. It peaks and troughs with rewind reviews and Korra. Actually, if I'm being completely honest, it always goes up while we've got a series of Avatar going on, and it always goes down when we have a series of rewind reviews going down. The people vote with their wallets, Chris, very clearly. Which I appreciate, and it does make me chuckle. But yeah, no, there's never any pressure ever to support in any way, shape, or form with us. If you'd like to, those are the options. But yeah, absolutely do your own thing. I've already talked about the ways in which you can contact us, so I think the other thing left for me to cover, Chris, is Raphodraws. Go support Raphodraws. Yeah. Instagram.com/Raphodraws, spelled RAPHO, and then draws just spelled DARWS. They have a Twitter and a YouTube and a Tumblr. There's launch links, launchlinks.io/u/Raphodraws, which will give you links to things like their Redbubble account where you can buy... I should clarify who Rapho is. Sorry, Rapho supplied the art of Appa at Sunset that we have as the main key piece of art for this podcast. It's a brilliant piece of art. And if you like that, then go check out their stuff, because like their Redbubble account has that available on like phone cases and other cool stuff, but also other stuff they've done, and they have so much great artwork. You can get it on like I'm really tempted, Chris. Actually, they've got the Appa at Sunset on like a little card holder. Like a...
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Oh wait, no, it's a laptop sleeve. Oh, it looks good as a laptop sleeve though. Oh, I thought it was a little card holder, but I clicked on it and got closer in. It's a laptop sleeve. Have they got it as a card holder? Either way, there's some stuff on here. Every time I look, I always think like, oh, you go like a little zipper pouch with some Avatar art on it, phone cases. There's tons of stuff. Go support Rapho. Anything you can do, because they were very kind enough to let us use that artwork without any, without any like. Because I mean, look, I love Rapho did this, but I'd be like, if someone came to me and said, "Can I use your art for my podcast?" I'm like, "Who are you and what is your podcast?" Like I'd have more questions, because I'd be like, "You're not gonna spout some like shit about woke media ruining everything, or like, do you know what I mean? Like you're not some secret, well,
accuse the listeners of murdering sprees, that sort of thing."
Yeah. You're not some sort of crazy person or a Nazi or whatever, right? Like I don't want my artwork associated with it, but they were just very kind and just absolutely gave us that trust. As a result, we got a really brilliant piece of art. So yeah, go support Rapho in any way you can. But that is, I believe, Chris, everything for this week. Are you excited for the next one?
There we go. Yeah, man, it's a part 2. Like a part 2. Intrigued to see where it goes, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Very much so. Well, that's everything for this week then. I've been Dan Doolan.
I've been Chris Billingham.
And come back next week when we sit down to review Civil Wars Part 2.